Hello, welcome back. This is gonna be my fifth fifth video. It is the fourth lore video because the first one is my explanation, which you should probably check out. It's uh it's pretty alright. Today I'm gonna be talking about the EDF, the Earth Defense Force, and how they were once the good guys, but then became the bad guys. I'll start from reading off the wiki, and then I'll get into my thoughts further on. The Earth Defense Force is the Earth Defense Force is the defensive military force of Earth and her colonies, disparagingly referred to as the drones by the Second Red Faction. The EDF exists as the occupying force of Mars, establishing what is known as the Martian state under the Martian Council in Eos. It was originally a force of good. They came when the Red Faction hailed them about what was happening with Ultor. And with the help of the Red Faction and the turned mercenaries, helped put Ultor down into the dirt. The EDF were actually fantastic in their treatment of the Martian people afterwards and did as much as they could to help them recover from the misery and horror that had become the Ultor Corporation. It is unfortunate then that during the 50-year transition period, the EDF would become as corrupt as Earth did, with many within its upper institution being what some may consider Earth nobility. Businessmen, stockbrokers, and powerful political leaders who wanted to line their pockets and the pockets of their constituents. As such, the EDF actually got its own stock in the stock market, able to get funding from corporations and private citizens across the globe. During this time, they began to crack down hard on the miners of Mars and began to enforce martial law. They couped the Martian Council and established their own puppet government, and generally became pretty terrible. They were never, it's said by veterans of the first Red Faction revolution that they were never as bad as Ultor, but they're still very, very bad. It's during these beginning years around the second Red Faction uprising that they began to crack down on civilians to a degree that made them mirror the Ultor Corporation. Innocent civilians were being captured, protesters were being shot, and quotas for resource mining were some of the heaviest and strictest they have ever been. Many EDF soldiers and officers defected to the budding Red Faction, the one that was formed, the second Red Faction. And it was during this time that, in addition to oppressing the normal Martians on the planet, the Earth, the settlers, they began to wage their war against the Marauders, specifically around the Mariner Valley. It was during this that their failings began to show up quite a bit, as the Marauders, whilst having very little in the way of proper military equipment, were able to push the EDF completely out of the valley, breaking out several of their political prisoners in the region and leading to the formation of the Second Red Faction officially. It was after all of this failure that the EDF found itself trying to handle the Second Red Faction. And that's where I kind of have to cut it off because I'm not going into the story yet. Same reasoning with the actual Red Faction lore video. I don't want to go too far into their specific actions during the game story. And so I've given you a rundown, and now I'll go into my bit of a ranty lore part. I like the EDF because they kind of look cool. I can't say I hate any faction, but the EDF has a very cool aesthetic. Their equipment Actually, no, I'm not going to talk about their equipment yet. The way they present themselves is a very nice touch. They're called drones. They're very uniform and stuck up and, spiffy and nice. But they're not nice. They're brutal government oppressors who will put down just about anything and everything with violent force. It's I like the fact that they transform into the oppressors as opposed to just carrying on with the status quo because they are actually very corrupt. I mean, hell, they have their own stock in the stock market and apparently it goes up. There is an interesting take on them in the fact that they aren't actually Martians. As far as I'm aware, EDF soldiers are from Earth. They are, in fact, employed exclusively from Earth to avoid people developing sympathies for Mars by recruiting locals. This is interesting because it didn't stop several people from defecting. In fact, a good portion of the Red Faction leadership was yeah, a good portion of the Red Faction leadership were former EDF, if I remember, which is pretty funny and kind of ironic. In regards to their aesthetic, again, I like it. It looks very kind of futuristic and kind of flat. Some of their vehicles remind me of, the Tesla truck and whatnot. But their equipment makes me kind of cringe. 90% of EDF weapons follow the cult of the bullpup. They have the bullpup shotgun, the bullpup assault rifle, the bullpup submachine gun, the bullpup sniper rifle. I'm serious. Almost all of their weapons are bullpups, and it makes me it's so crazy and weird. Because why have bullpups just suddenly become the coolest thing ever? The weapons are, like black. They're flat, they look metal and very, very modern and cutting edge, right? They actually have weapons, assault rifles, shotguns, the whole 9 yards. They've also developed interesting technology. There is the Peacekeeper, which is a fully automatic shotgun that apparently it's 20 gauge is a 20 gauge fully automatic shotgun and it's very cool. Then there's the Enforcer, which is I don't know how this works, but apparently the bullets are heat seeking. I don't understand homing projectiles. It's cool in game, it works very well and makes it where it's hard to miss, but I don't know how it's heat seeking. They also come up with Gauss weaponry. And typically, Gauss weaponry, at least in my mind, I think of like a rail gun, like where it fires this heavy projectile and fires out. But Gauss weaponry in Red Faction seem to be this kind of energy weapon. It's like a heavy assault rifle, except for a projectile, it's concussive force. It can punch through walls and knock over vehicles with enough shots in concession. So it seems like it projects a concussive blast towards, or concussive bolts towards whatever it has. The actual Gauss weapon is called a rail driver. The EDF rail driver is pretty cool. It has an X-ray sight and it punches through just about anything. This means that if you have a rail driver, you can shoot somebody out of the seat of a tank, and the tank is pretty much fine, other than the big ass hole in it, and the driver is dead. I think it's fantastic. You can use it to snipe enemies through buildings, shattering walls, and taking out anyone in the vicinity. I really like the rail rifle. I'm pretty sure it's also bullpup, but it's good. Finally, there's a singularity bomb, which turns into, I mean, it's literally just a gravity mine. You set it down and it draws in everything around it and blows up. It's pretty cool. I never really found any good uses for it other than blowing up buildings, but you can do that with anything else. I think where the EDF shine is in their vehicles. EDF have actual military vehicles. They have scout cars, staff cars, APCs, trucks, tanks, rocket artillery, and most importantly, air power. The EDF have actual air weapons, aircraft that fly around and patrol regions, which is an amazing advantage for them, which sucks because it's never really given any credence because with air power you can pretty much see anything below you with enough imaging software. It's kind of hard to hide from planes unless you're underground, and given the game, none of the Red Faction bases are underground. A small oversight, but they have a bombers that they use to destroy sites. The EDF equipment is cool. The EDF themselves don't know how to occupy shit. The EDF are some of the most blatant and aggressive occupying forces in ever. Like, they do everything wrong. They go out of their way to kill protesters. They kidnap people. They do stop and searches all the time. They'll act like assholes to anyone they feel like. The EDF is a terrible oppressing force. I wish we could have seen a better side of the EDF. You know, people who genuinely want to try and hold down the fort against what they truly believe is a terrorist organization. Instead, we get this baseless, plain group that simply wants to exploit a people for profit and nothing else. Willing to go out of their way to kill civilians, unarmed civilians, and bomb entire towns. That's a bit of a spoiler, but the EDF does order the artillery bombardment of a town. A town full of people. Yeah, the EDF is they are extremely evil. Not as evil as Ultor, but there's not really a contest going on. Both are evil and both do awful things. As far as I'm aware, the EDF is written almost not. Oh, first off, they have non-existent writing in the sense that all they do is react to what the Red Faction does. Their military officers are, from what I can tell, are promoted based on a mix of experience and like indiscriminate favor, in the sense that they will pick and choose who they feel are useful. Think of it almost like the Imperial Command from Star Wars. You know, it's corrupt. If you have political ties, you might get promoted to general. If you don't, you may be a grunt for the rest of your life. It all depends on how much money you have, how important your bloodline is, and I suppose there is some level of experience involved because whilst the EDF do carry out horrible atrocities, they're not incompetent. The EDF fight like rabid animals when cornered. They never seem to surrender, and when they get captured, it takes a massive amount of torture to finally get them to say something. The EDF also torture Red Faction members and pretty much anyone they feel like, so justified that they get tortured as well. I would have preferred to see a more dynamic EDF, having more vocal defectors, having elements deserting outright, actual platoons deserting and joining the Red Faction, going to meet with possible traitors among their ranks to organize espionage, but you never really do see that. You really only see them running around and being evil. They waste a lot of time with things that don't really make sense. The EDF has a habit of making a grand show of moving military equipment. Convoys are an easy to hit target, but they will move tanks out in the open through towns, just begging to have whatever occupying force take a shot at them. And oftentimes they get shots taken at them. I know this is a show of force thing, but if you want to keep the population from rebelling, don't drive tanks through their towns. Nobody enjoys having a massive military column roll through town. Rule by fear does not work, and it never will work. People are going to get aggressive and resisted. Resistance will form. The EDF is fine. Again, I know I complain a lot about them, but they're fine. As a good enemy, they're fine. Their equipment is cool in regards to the vehicles. Their small arms are kind of trash. They don't use grenades. In fact, nobody on Mars uses any type of like grenade. They mainly use mines and rocket launchers and things like that, but no actual grenades, which I find weird. They are generally a bad occupation force, which I suppose is good for the Red faction. I would have liked to see them explore more in depth. I would have liked to know more about how they operate on the political level. If we had privates disobeying officers, or if they would promote independent thinking on the battlefield as opposed to a strict hierarchy, do what I say or get put in the brig. As far as I'm aware, nobody knows whether or not they did that because there's nothing about them there. No. I've gotten better at putting images in my videos, so during most of my conversation, there should be some kind of imagery going on behind the scenes. Like, there should be vehicles, the EDF vehicles, some of the grunts, and some of the people who run it, as well as their weapons, so you can see what I'm talking about, because they are really atrocious. And that's about it. I don't know what I'm going to do for the next video. I've covered the major factions in the game, and I don't know what else to talk about. If anyone has any suggestions, leave it down in the comment section. I think I might chalk it up to either a lore video about how people survive on Mars, like their daily life regarding how they eat, what they eat, how do they get power, yada yada yada, or I might go into the actual story of Red Faction Guerrilla, which it might be a short one, all things considered, because the story is, again, fairly bad, but I'll do my best to give it justice, and then I'll talk about it afterwards. That's up to you, though. Tell me which one you'd prefer. Other than that, I'm outie.